Hi guys, Craig here and welcome back to my channel. So today's video is going to be on Ian Brady and Myra Hindley, or more famously known, the Moor's murderers. So grab yourself a cuppa and let's get into the video. Were carried out by Ian Brady and Myra Hindley between July 1963 and October 1965 in and around the Manchester, England area. There were 5 child victims in total: Pauline Reed, John Kilbride, Ann Downey, Keith Bennett and Edward Evans. The ages of these child victims ranged anywhere between 10 and 17 years old. It is also claimed that at least 4 of these victims were sexually assaulted by Myra and Ian. 2 of these victims were found in graves dug on Saddleworth Moor, and a 3rd grave was found there in 1987, more than 20 years after the trial of Brady and Hindley. Keith Bennett's body was also thought to be buried on the moor, but despite numerous search attempts, the body still remains undiscovered. Initially, Ian and Myra was only charged with 3 of the murders and 3 sexual assaults of John Kilbride, Ann Downey and Edward Evans, but the investigation then reopened in 1985 after it is thought that Brady confessed to the killing of Pauline Reed and Keith Bennett. After confessing to these additional murders, both Ian and Myra were taken separately to Saddleworth Moor to try and help find the missing graves. Myra was absolutely vilified in the British press. At one point she was even dubbed the most evil woman in Britain. She even made repeated appeal attempts to try and overturn her sentence. She even garnered some support, with some people saying that she was a reformed character and no longer a danger to the British public. But thankfully Myra was never released, and she died in 2002 at age 60. After serving 36 years in prison. Brady, meanwhile, was diagnosed as a psychopath in 1985. He was then committed to the high security hospital, Ashworth. He made it clear that he never wished to be released and made numerous attempts to die. He'd done this by constantly going on a hunger strike and refusing to eat. He also died in 2017 at the age of 79. Their crimes and criminal profile became worldwide news, and they will go down in history as being one of the world's most infamous serial killing duos. Now let me give you a little background on the both of them, starting with Ian Brady. Ian Duncan Stewart was born in Glasgow, Scotland on the 2nd of January 1938 to his mother Peggy Stewart. Details of Ian's father is unknown, but Peggy did claim that he died 3 months before Ian was born. Peggy was a struggling waitress and found it hard bringing Ian up on her own. So it was at this point she decided to place him into the care of local family Mary and John Sloan, but it must be noted that Peggy did continue to visit Ian. It is often stated in the media that Ian used to like to capture and torture small animals. This is a trait that we see a lot in serial killers as kids, but it must be noted that Ian actually denies this fact. Around the age of 9, along with his family, Ian went on a trip to Loch Lomond in Scotland. It is said that this is where he gained his love for the great outdoors. So at around age 9, Ian got accepted into Shawlands Academy School. This school was designed to deal with pupils with above average intelligence. But here's where things started to change for Ian. He didn't really fit in at Shawlands Academy, which caused him to misbehave and get into trouble regularly. So at the age of 15, Ian made the decision to leave Shawlands Academy. From there, Ian floated around doing a few different jobs. These included being a tea boy and being a butcher's messenger. At this time, he also started dating a girl called Evelyn Grant. But things quickly soured for the pair when Ian, after discovering she went to a dance with another lad, decided to threaten her with a flick knife. This could be a sign of things to come. Just before Ian's 17th birthday, he appeared in court and was sentenced to probation. One of the terms of this probation was that he had to go back and live with his mother Peggy. But by this point, Peggy had moved to Manchester and remarried. The man she remarried was a man called Patrick Brady. So as you might have guessed, that's where Ian got his surname from. Within a year of moving to Manchester, Ian was caught stealing, and because of this he was sent to Strangeways prison for 3 months. As Ian was under 18 and still classed as a minor, he was also sent to Borstal for 2 years. This was to try and divert him from a life of crime, but he was then released from Borstal on the 14th of November 1957. He then proceeded to return to Manchester, where he took a job as a labourer, but Ian absolutely hated this job. He felt like it was beneath him and that he could do so much better. So in an attempt to better himself, Ian went to the local library and checked out some books on bookkeeping. He studied these books from cover to cover, and his parents would actually go on to say that they were impressed with how much he actually did study and how much of an interest he took in this. This actually all paid off for Ian when he then went on to get a job in a chemical distribution factory. His work colleagues at the chemical distribution factory would go on to say about Ian that he was quite quiet, very punctual, but sometimes extremely short-tempered. A few other facts about Ian was that he absolutely loved motorbikes. Anything motorbike related, Ian loved. Now, a little bit of a stranger fact is that he had an absolute obsession with anything Nazi related. This would play a part later on. Now let me tell you a little bit about Myra. Myra Hindley was born on the 23rd of July 1942 in a working class area of Manchester. Her mother was called Nellie and her father was called Bob. Bob had actually spent some time in the army during World War II, and he was known locally as a bit of a tough guy, a bit of a hard man. He also expected the same from his two daughters, Maureen and Myra. On one occasion, Myra would recall that she got into a scrap with a local boy and came in crying to her father, to which her father replied, "If you don't get out there and leather him, I'll leather you myself." Something would happen in Myra's life at age 13 that would haunt her forever. Her best friend Michael Higgins had asked her to come swimming at the local disused reservoir, but Myra had other plans those days and couldn't accompany him. Later that day, Michael would sadly drown, and Myra would blame herself for this for the rest of her life. Myra's first job was as an office clerk, where she would do general filing, typing, and other office-related errands. Myra was liked by her co-workers. It was even noted that when Myra lost her first paycheck, they all rallied around to help her get it back. But unfortunately, Myra got dismissed from this post for not regularly turning up for her shifts. It was also around this time that Myra got engaged to a guy that she'd been dating for just a few months. But not long after, Myra decided to call off the engagement, stating that the guy couldn't give her the life that she wanted. So in January 1961, Myra also got a job in the chemical distribution company, and this is where she would first meet Ian Brady. So it was at this point that the tornado met the volcano. Myra quickly became obsessed with Ian. She used to also keep a diary where she would make regular entries all about Ian Brady. On the 27th of July is when Myra noted in her diary that she first spoke to Ian, and the pair continued to talk throughout the next couple of months. And on December 22nd is when Myra noted that Ian actually asked her on a date. And not long after this, Ian started to give Myra some reading materials. At first she found these reading materials a little bit strange because they were all related to German Nazis. She also realised that Ian had a little bit of an obsession with the Aryan race. So in an effort to become slightly more attractive to Ian, Myra dyed her once black hair bottle blonde. She also started applying thick crimson red lipstick. She also started to dress a little bit more risky, with a lot of high boots, short skirts and leather jackets. In a letter to a close friend, Myra did express some concern about Ian's behaviour, even going as far as to say she thinks he may have drugged her one night, but yet she was still obsessed with him anyway. Myra would later go on to ask the friends to destroy this letter. So in early 1963 is when Myra states that Ian first brought up the concept of the perfect murder. But by this point, Ian was already living with Myra at her grandparents' house. And on the 12th of July, in the same month, Ian instructed Myra that after work she was to borrow a work van and start driving around. He would follow her on his motorcycle, and if he flashed his lights, she was to stop, and this would indicate that he had seen a potential victim. So the pair started driving around, and not long after that, they spotted an 8-year-old girl, and Ian flashed his lights for Myra to stop. Luckily for that 8-year-old girl, Myra decided not to stop, as she knew her mother. So the pair continued to drive, and around 7:30 p.m, Ian flashed his lights once more. This time it was for 16-year-old Pauline Reed. Pauline Reed was on her way to a local school dance, and she was actually one of the classmates of Myra's younger sister Maureen. Myra offered Pauline a lift, and she accepted. Myra later went on to say that she thought a 16-year-old missing girl would garner less attention than an 8-year-old missing girl. Once in the car, Myra started to tell Pauline a lie about a very expensive glove that she had lost on Saddleworth Moor. She then proceeded to ask Pauline if she would come up there and help her look for it, to which Pauline agreed. Once they got to the moors, Ian Brady then made an appearance. Myra passed this off, saying that he was here to help look for the glove too. Myra claims it is at this point that she returned to the van and Ian and Pauline went on to the moor to look for the glove. Myra states that Ian returned 30 minutes later and says to her, "It's done. Why don't you come and have a look at the dead body?" Myra then proceeded to ask Ian, "Have you raped her?" To which he replies, "Well, of course I did." Ian then went to find a shovel that he had hidden on the moors at a previous visit. Myra then states that she went back to the van while Ian buried Pauline's lifeless body. Ian would go on to claim that not only was Myra present for the murder of Pauline Reed, but she also helped sexually assault her. Ian killed Pauline by slitting her throat. It says that her throat was slit so bad that she was nearly decapitated. On the evening of November 23rd, 1963, it was time for the couple's second murder, that of 12-year-old John Kilbride. Ian and Myra encountered John at a local market and offered him a lift home, saying to the 12-year-old boy that your parents will be so worried about you being out this late. They also bribed him with a bottle of sherry. Once in the car, the couple again used the excuse about Myra's missing glove on the moor. So fatefully, John agreed to help them. Once at the moor, Myra waited in the car while Ian took John onto the moors. Ian Brady then proceeded to violently sexually assault and murder 12-year-old John Kilbride. The way he done this was, again, he tried to slit his throat with a serrated blade, but unfortunately the knife broke, causing Ian Brady to remove his shoestring and strangle the boy, before once again burying him on the moors. Murder number 3 happened on the evening of June 16th, 1964, and this time it was 12-year-old Keith Bennett. Keith Bennett was walking home from his grandmother's house when he witnessed Myra Hindley struggling to lift some boxes into her car. She shouted him over and asked if he helped her, she would give him a lift home, to which he accepted. Ian was also at this point lurking in the back, and once in the car, they again used the now infamous lie of the missing glove. Once at the moor, Keith left with Ian while Myra claims she waited in the car. Again, 30 minutes later, Ian returned and stated to Myra, "Yes, before you ask, I did sexually assault him." It is believed that Keith Bennett was also strangled with a shoestring and buried on the moors, although his body is, to this day, still undiscovered. For murder number 4, the pair got a little bit more bold, deciding to visit a fairground to pick their next victim. And this is where they spotted 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey by herself. So they devised a plan. They walked up to Leslie Ann Downey and then dropped some shopping bags that they were carrying. They then asked Leslie Ann Downey would she help them take their shopping back to the car, to which Leslie Ann agreed. Once at the car, Myra Hindley then says, "Could you give us a hand getting it home and then I'll give you a lift home?" Again, Leslie Ann agreed. But once at Myra Hindley's house, this is where poor Leslie Ann's nightmare began. She was undressed, gagged, and made to pose for some pornographic photos, before she was eventually sexually assaulted and murdered. Myra claims that she went upstairs to run Leslie Ann a bath, and when she returned, she was already dead, claiming to have nothing to do with the murder. The next morning, the pair drove to Saddleworth Moor, where they buried Leslie Ann's naked body in a shallow grave. So murder number 5 would be the beginning of the end for Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. Their next victim would be 17-year-old apprentice engineer Edward Evans. The pair drove to a local railway station where Myra waited in the car and Ian went to select his next victim. It is unsure what Ian actually says to Edward Evans to get him into the car, but once there, he then introduced Myra as his sister. The pair then went back to Myra's house and relaxed over a bottle of wine. At some point, Ian Brady instructed Myra to go and call David Smith. David Smith was the husband of Myra's younger sister, Maureen. It says that the Hindley family weren't overly keen on David Smith due to his criminal past. But over the last few years, him and Ian struck up quite the friendship. This really concerned Myra because she really felt like it put her sister Maureen in a little bit of danger. But despite this, Myra done as she's told and she went to get David. She instructed him to wait outside until he seen a sign. The sign would be a flashing light. Once he seen the flashing light, he was to come to the door. When he seen the flashing light, David then went inside, Within seconds of entering the door, he heard this almighty scream and quickly heard Myra say, "Quick, David, you have to help him." David rushed into the living room and seen Ian Brady standing over Edward Evans and then quickly striking him on the head with a wrench before continuing to strangle him to death. David Smith went on to note that he couldn't help Edward Evans because he was frozen in fear and utterly gobsmacked at what he was seeing. Ian then asked David to help him move the body, but the body was just too heavy for the pair to lift. So Ian wrapped Edward Evans in some plastic sheeting and stored him in the spare room. David Smith went on to say that Ian asked him to return the next morning with his child's pram to help him move the body to the car. So around 3 a.m. that morning, David Smith returned home, projectile vomiting on arrival. His wife Maureen was rightfully concerned. David Smith then proceeded to tell her exactly what had just happened. David decided that he had to go to the police with this information, but he was really worried that on his way to the phone box he was going to be intercepted by Brady and Hindley. So armed with a bread knife, he waited until the morning and ran to the phone box as quick as he could, where he proceeded to phone the police and tell them everything he knew. He then waited in the phone box for a police officer to come and pick him up. The police then, after hearing David's story, decided to go round to Myra's house. Once inside, they seen Ian Brady lying on the bed writing a note to his employer. It is noted that one of the officers noticed that the spare bedroom door was locked. When he asked to have a look inside, Myra stated that it was locked. The police officer then offered to take Myra to her workplace to retrieve the key for the door, as she stated that's where it was. Myra panicked and fumbled around a bit, but eventually Ian Brady says, "Myra, just let them in." Once the officers got in to the spare room, they were greeted with the lifeless body of Edward Evans, and Ian Brady was arrested on the suspicion of murder. While Ian was getting dressed, he stated to the police that it wasn't murder, it was an accident. He and Edward had got into an argument and it had went too far. Myra wasn't initially arrested, but she did accompany Ian Brady to the police station. She refused to give a statement and just kept confirming his story that it was an accident. But shortly after, on the 11th of October, Myra Hindley was also arrested on the suspicion of accessory to murder. Police officers then went on to get a warrant to search Myra Hindley's house. And while this search was taking place, they found a notebook, and inside that notebook, the name John Kilbride was found. This made police officers very suspicious that Ian and Myra might have had something to do with the local children that had gone missing. Also found in Myra's prayer book was a left luggage ticket for a locker in Manchester Central Station. When the police went to this locker, there was a suitcase inside. Chillingly, in this suitcase there was audio recordings and pornographic photos of Leslie Ann Downey. On these audio tapes, you can hear Leslie Ann getting murdered, screaming and begging for her life. Also found in the suitcase was multiple photos of Saddleworth Moor, and David Smith had stated to the police that Brady bragged about having photographic evidence of the graves to remind him. So this prompted police to start a search of Saddleworth Moor, and on the 16th of October, police, while searching the moor, came across an arm bone sticking out of the peat. This was initially thought to be John Kilbride, but it was later identified as Leslie Ann Downey. And on the 21st of October, the extremely decomposed body of John Kilbride was also found. And that same day, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley were remanded in police custody. Police were absolutely certain that Ian and Myra were responsible for the other missing children in the area, but due to the extremely bad weather in Manchester in November, the search had to be called off. At the committal hearing on the 6th of December, Ian Brady was charged with the murders of Edward Evans, John Kilbride and Leslie Ann Downey, and Myra Hindley was charged with the murders of Edward Evans and Leslie Ann Downey. As well, she was charged with harbouring Ian Brady while she had known he had killed John Kilbride. Strangely, many of the photographs taken on Saddleworth Moor depicted photos of Myra's dog Puppet. Some of these photos were taken when Puppet was just a puppy. So to help detect the age of these photos, police officers got a veterinarian to examine Puppet to determine his age. And to do this, they had to put him under local anaesthetic, from which he never recovered. Upon hearing this news, Myra was absolutely furious, accusing police officers of murdering her dog. Some police officers would even go on to note that this is the only time that the icy cold Myra Hindley ever showed any emotion. So the 14-day trial begun on the 19th of April 1966. The courtroom had to be fitted with all kinds of security measures to help protect Ian Brady and Myra Hindley, who were both charged with murdering Leslie Ann Downey, Edward Evans, and John Kilbride. David Smith was the chief prosecuting witness. Shortly before the trial, the News of the World offered David Smith £1,000 for his rights to the story. There was also a few American newspapers that offered to pay up to £6,000 for the rights to the story. When David decided to accept the offer from the News of the World, the court launched an investigation into this, and it was deemed even though David Smith had financially gained from the murders, it would not affect the case due to his early testimonies. Both Myra and Ian entered pleas of not guilty. Brady testified for over 8 hours and Myra testified for over 6. Brady did admit to striking Edward Evans on the head, but says that someone else murdered him. Ian Brady came across extremely arrogant during the trial, and this didn't endear him to the jury one bit. Myra denied that the photographs in the suitcase taken on Saddleworth Moor were Graves. She claimed that she knew nothing about this. Also, a 16-minute long audio tape of the murder and rape of Leslie Ann Downey was played to the court, where you could clearly hear Myra being brutal and cruel towards her. But Myra would state that she was only brutal and cruel towards her because she was worried that the neighbours were going to hear her scream. Myra claims that during the murder of Leslie Ann Downey, when she was being undressed, Myra was upstairs. When she was being raped, Myra states she was looking out the window. Myra also claims that when Leslie Ann Downey was murdered, she was upstairs running a bath, claiming to know nothing about it. On the 6th of May, the jury members had made a decision after deliberating for only 2 hours. They found Ian Brady guilty of 3 murders and Myra Hindley guilty of 2. The death penalty had just recently been abolished at this point, so the judge imposed the maximum sentence possible at the time: life in prison without parole. Ian Brady was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences, and Myra was given 2, plus an additional 7 years for harbouring Ian Brady when she knew he had killed John Kilbride. Ian Brady was taken to Durham Prison, while Myra Hindley was taken to the infamous women's prison, Holloway. Then in 1985, Ian Brady allegedly told Fred Haraldson, a journalist working for the Sunday People magazine, that he had killed Pauline Reed and Keith Bennett, something that the police already expected, as they had disappeared the same time as the other local children. So the Greater Manchester Police reopened the case, and after 100 days of searching Saddleworth Moor, Pauline Reed's body was discovered. But sadly, still to this day, Keith Bennett's body has never been found. So guys, that was it. That was Ian Brady and Myra Hindley, the Moor's murderers. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. And if you did, please give it a big thumbs up and press the subscribe button. And I will see you all next time. Bye!